Most of the drive had been spent in silence, and that's the way that I prefer it. I've known the man sitting behind the steering wheel for many years. He's been there since the beginning, really, at least the beginning that matters. Silas Pembroke was there when a young army corporal arrived at an abandoned French chateau looking for a twisted monster in some misguided attempt to find redemption from an act of cowardice. He guided that same naive boy to the monster he sought, and he had been there to intervene when the boy had failed. He'd even given that boy a flicker of hope when the monster had forever changed him. I owe Pembroke a lot. I've done much to repay that debt over the long years, but I still owe him. That doesn't mean that I have to like him. Still, he's the only one that I can trust to get me to where I need to go without asking many questions or raising any red flags. The monster has its head turned towards other things at the moment, and I'd like for it to stay that way. We left the highway over an hour ago, and I know that we're getting closer to my destination. I glance over my shoulder at Eleanor. The large black dog is stretched out across the car's back seat, her head laying on her crossed front legs. She's drowsing, although she isn't actually sleeping. She's extremely calm, just like she almost always is. I turn back around in my seat just in time to see a white sign welcoming us to the small town of Broken Bend, North Dakota. The road is lined with trees on both sides. If there's a town up ahead, there isn't much besides the sign to give any indication of it. After a few minutes, we come to a curve in the road, and in the middle of that curve is a large tree. The road splits around it, going off in different directions. A literal broken bend. Clever. I tell Pembroke to pull the car over next to the fork. I hadn't planned to have him drive me all the way into town, and this seems like as good a place as any to part ways. The car rolls to a stop near the tree. I'm opening my door almost before the wheels have finished moving. I hear a click as Pembroke releases the car trunk. Going around the side of the vehicle, I lift it and take 2 bags out. I set the longer of the 2 on the pavement before slinging the old worn backpack over my shoulders. Picking the larger one back up, I close the trunk and let Eleanor out. She steps down out of the car and stretches before yawning. I've barely got the door closed before the car is moving again. Our eyes lock for a moment as Pembroke turns the vehicle around and heads back the way we had come from. He nods once as he passes by, and that's it. I'm on my own. I glance down at Eleanor. Well, not really alone. I scratch her behind the ears before we start walking towards town. It's a pleasant early spring day. There's some of winter's chill left in the air, but not enough to take away from the enjoyable feeling of the breeze on my skin. It's been quite a while since I've been outdoors like this. It's not often that I'm able to go for a long walk or simply move along at a leisurely pace. Normally I'm rushing from one place to another. It feels good to stretch my legs again. After we've walked a little more than a mile, I glance around to make sure that we're still alone before turning to my right and going into the tree line. There's a dead tree with its top half broken off, one that I can easily distinguish from the other trees. I nod to myself as I set the large bag down the forest floor and take off my backpack. This will do. I open the backpack and remove a folding camping shovel. Checking one more time to make sure that no one's watching, I quickly dig a hole in the ground and deposit the large bag inside of it. Making sure that it's deep enough to be concealed but shallow enough to be easily removed, I push the dirt on top of it until it's fully buried. Eleanor stares at me silently as I wipe off the shovel and return it to my backpack. We return to the road and continue our walk. We get maybe another half a mile before a black pickup truck approaches. It has a bank of lights bolted to the top of the cab, and as it gets closer I can see that it has government plates. The driver pulls the truck off the side of the road. The driver pulls the truck off the side of the road across from us and brings it to a stop. The side door is adorned with the logo of the Broken Bend Police Department. I stop walking and motion for Eleanor to sit down beside me. A man in his late 40s or early 50s opens the door and steps out of the pickup. He's not wearing a uniform, but even if there wasn't a clearly visible badge hanging from his belt, I would still know that he's a cop. Police officers that have been on the job for a long time carry themselves in a certain way. He greets me in a friendly tone and introduces himself as Chuck Carter, Broken Bend's chief of police. He's being very polite, but his smile doesn't extend to his eyes. It's It's obvious that he's taking my measure as he tries to figure out who this stranger is that's approaching his town. Peter Lewis, I introduce myself, giving him the same empty smile that he's giving me. Carter turns his attention to Eleanor. He and the dog stare at each other for a moment before he states that Broken Bend has leash laws for pets out in public places. I quickly apologize and tell him that I was unaware that there was a local ordinance in place, and that I have a leash in my backpack and that I'd be happy to attach it to her collar. He doesn't care about the leash, of course. We both know that. This is just an excuse to have a formal reason to get more information about me. He assures me that it isn't a big deal, and that as long as I use the leash from now on, it will be fine. Cocking his head slightly, he tells me that he'll just need to see some identification so that he can make a note of the warning. Before I reach for my wallet, I inform him that I'm carrying a handgun in a holster on my waist that is being covered up by my coat. It's best that I'm the one to bring up the weapon, as it makes a statement that I'm not attempting to hide anything. I tell him that my concealed carry permit is in my wallet along with my identification. I then ask him about how he would like me to proceed. It's a simple question, but it's accomplishing two things. It's making it clear to Carter that I consider him to be in charge of the situation. He's way out of his depth, of course, but that's not how I want him to feel. My question is also designed to be a bit of a test. There's a right way to handle a situation like this, and there are a lot of wrong ways. How this plays out will tell me a lot about the person in charge of the local law enforcement. Carter thanks me for being honest and open, and that he appreciates me making sure that there won't be any misunderstandings. A final word comes out with a bit of emphasis that makes it quite clear as to what he's getting at. He tells me in an almost conversational tone that, to ensure that one of those misunderstandings doesn't happen right now, I should probably put my gun down on the road, just to be on the safe side. Without hesitation, I do as he asks. Using just the tips of my fingers, I lift the handgun from the holster by the grip and gently place it onto the concrete. Standing back up, I go into my pocket and produce my wallet. I hand it over to him and wait patiently as he digs through its contents. He sees something inside and looks up. Raising an eyebrow, he asks if I am a serviceman. He must have found my military identification card. Yes, sir, I tell him. Corporal Peter Lewis of the United States Army. I left to work in the private sector a few years ago. That isn't technically a lie, depending on how one interprets a few years. The conversation turns to the reason why I'm here in Broken Bend. I tell him that, since leaving the Army, I've been feeling a bit disillusioned with civilian life. I smile crookedly as I say that I was apparently never meant to work behind a desk, as I've always had a bit of a wandering spirit. Because of this, I've taken a sabbatical from my job so that I can travel for a while, hiking and camping across some of the northern states while I clear my head and figure out exactly what I want to do with the rest of my life. I sheepishly admit that it's likely some sort of early midlife crisis, something that I feel like I have to get out of my system. All of it is a lie. A well-rehearsed one, but a lie nonetheless. I wonder what he would say if I just came right out and told him why I'm really here. This town he calls home is lighting up like a massive beacon to anyone who knows what to look for. Seemingly satisfied with my story, Carter hands me back my wallet and tells me to go ahead and put my gun back into its holster. He tells me that he was in the Navy during his younger years, and that he understands how hard it is to adjust back into civilian life. As he returns to his pickup, he asks if I need a ride into town. I politely decline the invitation and thank him for the offer. I wait until the truck has disappeared from view before allowing the smile to fall from my face and turning my attention to Eleanor. Out of the corner of my eye, I had noticed her turning her attention away from what was happening and focusing on the woods on the far right side of the road. It had been subtle enough that the officer hadn't noticed. She was my constant companion, and I knew when something piqued her interest. "Show me," I instruct her. Eleanor hurries across the street and into the trees, making sure to stay close enough to me so that I can follow. Most dogs would have had their noses to the ground as they followed a scent. She's a much different breed, however. Her face remains pointing forward, her nose pulling in the smells from the air as her eyes dart back and forth. She's eerily quiet despite her bulk. I can barely hear her paws pressing into the leaves and other debris on the forest floor. The deeper we go into the woods, the thicker the canopy overhead becomes. More and more of the sun is blocked by the overhanging branches until it becomes dim enough for me to have to concentrate to distinguish Eleanor from the rest of my surroundings. The area near the road had smelled of clean air and pine. Here, that is replaced by the smell of rotting wood and fungus. After nearly an hour, Eleanor stops next to a small creek. There isn't much water flow, and is only 5 feet or so across and less than a foot deep. The dog approaches it and lowers her head to sniff it. At first it seems like she's going to take a drink, but instead the hairs on the back of her neck stand up and her lips pull back from her teeth in a growl. I get closer to the water and kneel, putting my backpack down next to me. I open it and dig around for a few seconds till I find a small plastic box. Inside is a number of small instruments, but I ignore them and instead remove a pair of rubber gloves from inside. I slip them on before dipping the index finger of my right hand into the water. When I pull it back out, I notice that the water isn't dripping off quite right. That's an odd thing to say. That's exactly what's happening. It's like the droplets are falling just a millisecond too slowly. I turn my head to the left. That's the direction the creek is flowing from. If there really is something wrong with it, the source of that issue is likely upstream. Eleanor and I follow the creek deeper into the woods. After a few minutes, the dim light begins to brighten, and soon we emerge into a large clearing. At the center of it is a small lake, its still surface reflecting the sunlight. We walk along the edge until we reach a river on the other side that feeds into the lake. I test the water with one gloved hand to find that whatever is happening further downstream is also happening here. That means we need to keep going. The river leads back into the woods. We haven't been following it for more than a couple of minutes when we come to a cave-like rock outcropping that the water is flowing out of. Now we're getting somewhere. Being careful to avoid stepping into the water, we follow a narrow path that runs along the river into the cave. We stop just long enough for me to take a flashlight out of my backpack and turn it on before proceeding into the darkness. Eleanor doesn't need the light, but there's nothing special about my eyes, so I certainly do. The path has a number of twists and turns. We pass half a dozen side passages. It would be extremely easy to get lost in here. We're careful to keep following the river, however. There's no point in taking any risks. Eleanor begins to growl again. This time it's much deeper and louder. We're getting close to something. We move around a tight corner and find ourselves in front of a large pool. It's roughly 20 feet across. There aren't any other water sources connecting into it that I can see. It must be filled by underground waterways, and it drains out via the river. Eleanor's teeth are bared as she keeps her eyes locked in the pool. She moves away from it slowly until her back is up against the rock wall. I've never seen her like this. My first instinct is to just get the hell out of there, run back out of the cave and put as much distance between it and me as possible. I may not have Eleanor's senses, but I don't need them to know that something is very wrong here. I ignore that impulse. Instead, I move to the edge of the pool and shine the flashlight down into the water. The water is dark, and the beam doesn't penetrate very far down into it. I set it down on the ground to retrieve a small glow stick from my backpack. I crack it and shake the chemicals inside until it's illuminated with a bright green light. I drop it into the pool and watch as it sinks. There isn't anything for the first dozen feet or so. The light suddenly illuminates something deeper in the pool as it continues to descend. It's too far down for me to see it clearly. Whatever it is, it's large and it's moving. My eyes widen as I realize that I'm looking down at a mass of tentacles. I scramble back to my feet and grab the flashlight. Without a word, Eleanor and I hurry back towards the cave exit, moving as quickly as we can on the slippery rock. I keep expecting to hear some horrible creature give chase, but we make it back outside without incident. We don't stop moving until we're past the lake and back inside the forest, and even then we only pause to rest for a moment before pushing on back to the road. I'm not sure what it is that I just saw, but in my experience, monstrous creatures hiding in dark caves rarely turn out to be a good thing. I'm tempted to call in some help. Until I know what's actually going on, though, I don't know if that's actually necessary or, if it is, what kind of assistance to ask for. I need more information. There's really only one way to get that. I fish Eleanor's leash out of my backpack and attach it to her collar. If there are any answers, they're likely going to be found in town. It turns out that we're not very far from civilization. After less than half an hour of walking, we arrive at our destination. Broken Bend is what I can best describe as idyllic. If I was to try to picture a small American town at the base of a mountain, this is exactly the place that would come to mind. The downtown area is made of older but well-maintained buildings on both sides of the street. They line the main road as it runs towards the snow-capped mountain in the distance. Most of them are businesses owned and operated by town residents. I also spot what appears to be the mayor's office on the opposite side of the road. Eleanor and I pass one building that has a sign in the window announcing it as the police station. I look through the glass and see Chief Carter talking to some of his officers. I furrow my brow. There seems to be a surprisingly high police presence for such a small town. The sun is beginning to set in the distance. I doubt that I'll be able to learn much, if anything, before dark. The best course of action is to find a place to stay for the night, get some food and sleep, and start fresh in the morning. I locate a small motel at the edge of downtown. We go inside and I see the woman behind the desk's eyes immediately go to Eleanor. Now for the tricky part. I politely tell her that my dog and I are visiting Broken Bend. We were hoping to get a room for the night. Before she can say anything, I tell her that I don't know her motel's policy on pets, but if there's a rule against it, I'd be very appreciative if she would see fit to break that rule just this once. This is the only place that I know of to stay tonight, and besides, Eleanor is a very well-behaved dog that won't give her any issues. For her part, Eleanor is playing the role of a sweet, innocent dog to perfection. Her head is slightly down, and her eyes are wide as they peer up at the woman. She even raises up one paw as if asking to shake. All dogs can be cute when they want to. Eleanor can be downright dramatic. It turns out that the motel does allow pets, so all of her acting was for nothing. Or maybe not. The woman reaches behind the counter and presents a dog treat to her. She eagerly steps forward and devours it. We get food from a nearby barbecue restaurant. As I'm ordering, I make it a point to purchase half a dozen bottles of water from the cooler next to the counter. The thought of that thing lounging in the cave pool that was directly connected to the town's water supply makes me very wary of using tap water for anything. I'm sure that there are many filters involved with cleaning it, but still, I'm not going to take any chances. After eating, we return to the motel and turn in for the night. I do anyway. Eleanor lays down on the rug so that she's facing the door and sets her head on her paws. While she will be lazy from time to time and sometimes zones out, she doesn't actually need sleep. That, along with her many other talents, makes her the perfect guard dog. As I lay in bed, my thoughts turn from the monster in the woods to my own personal one. It's been almost 80 years since I first encountered it as I laid scared in that hospital bed. 80 years since I returned to that place looking for it and finding it empty. Almost empty. Pembroke had been there. He had directed me to where the monster now called home. He had warned me that a terrible fate awaited me if I continued down the path that I was on. I had thought that he meant the monster would kill me, but I had been wrong. It had instead been impressed by my ill-conceived sense of duty. It changed me into whatever it is that I am now, and it had used a truly horrific method of forcing me to serve it. I've looked for a way to break free ever since. I have no doubt that the monster knows that. I think that watching me struggle amuses it. It's nothing if not confident. Too confident. It doesn't believe that it can possibly be harmed, but I know better. I know why it conducts its experiments. It can be killed. That window is closing, though. I need to find something powerful enough before it manages to complete its work. Hopefully that something is here in Broken Bend. The initial data seem to suggest it's a good possibility, and I now know for a fact that there's more than a small amount of town to be found here. I must have drifted off, because I'm suddenly waking up to Eleanor tugging on my hand. Her mouth is around my fingers, but she's being extremely careful not to accidentally push her teeth into my flesh. I immediately snap to full consciousness. It's a habit that I picked up in the war, and I've had it ever since. She leads me over to the motel room window before letting go of my hand. Pressing myself up against the wall next to it to conceal myself as much as possible, I pull back the edge of the curtain and look out. It's dark outside. The only illumination is from a series of streetlights, but the light they produce doesn't reach far. I don't see anything unusual. A man suddenly walks into view. He isn't on the sidewalk, but is instead walking down the middle of the road. There's an odd stiffness to his gait, like his limbs aren't fully used to moving. My first thought is that he's drunk. It doesn't seem right, though. Typically, the movements of a drunk person are more loose than stiff. A moment later, two women appear, going in the same direction that the man is. One of them is on the far sidewalk, while the other is walking with one foot in the street gutter. They're both moving with that same disjointed motion that the man is. More and more people join them. Soon there is what looks like half the town population walking past the window. I can't see where they're headed from my angle, but it appears as if they're all going to the same place. I wait for the street to be empty once again before leaving the window. Quickly getting dressed, I hook my gun holster onto my belt and pull on my backpack. I go over to the door and open it as slowly as I can. Quick glance outside confirms that there aren't any stragglers that have been left behind. The entire procession of people is farther up the street, and none of them appear to be looking back. I look down at Eleanor and instruct her to go get the bag that I buried earlier in the day. She gives me a disapproving look and doesn't move. I assure her that I'll be fine, and that the sooner she gets the bag, the sooner she can come find me. With one last unhappy glare, she runs off into the night. Taking a deep breath, I leave the motel room and follow the people down the street. I stick to the shadows, staying close to the sides of the buildings and out of the reach of the lampposts. It's not difficult to maintain a consistent distance. They're all moving at the same slow yet steady pace. When they reach the edge of town, they don't follow the road as it curves. Instead, the entire crowd walks into the nearby woods. I frown. This just became a lot more difficult. I don't have much of a choice, though. If I want to know what's going on, I need to keep going. I watch as the last person, a child of about 10 or 11, disappears into the foliage before hurrying over to the tree line. I pause for a few moments to listen. It's difficult to hear anything over the crowd trampling through the underbrush. Something catches my attention. I look down to find that a thick fog is starting to pour out of the woods. There's no way that it's natural. The weather conditions aren't right for fog, and besides, I refuse to believe that anything is that coincidental. I enter the woods, being as careful as I can to make as little noise as possible. It's difficult to see anything in the near total darkness, but I can still hear the noise being made by the crowd of people, so I follow that. More than once I nearly fall on my face as I trip over a branch or tree root. Each time I barely manage to catch myself at the last second. I follow the people for what feels like hours, but is probably only about 20 minutes. I start to notice a light up ahead, and silhouettes of stumbling people become visible a dozen yards ahead of me. Crouching down to make sure that I'm not somehow seen, I continue forward until I reach the edge of the trees. I stay concealed in the brush as I stare out at one of the strangest things I've ever seen. Somehow I've been led to the lake that Eleanor and I found earlier. I'm on the other side of it now, though. The crowd is standing at the edge of the water and looking out over it silently. The light is coming from the lake itself. It's difficult to see through the mass of bodies, but I can just make out a blue glow under the surface of the water. The mysterious fog is also billowing out of it and onto the shore. I squint. Everything that's happening in Broken Bend seems to come back to the water supply. I almost jump out of my skin as something touches my leg. My hand going to my gun, I turn slightly to find that Eleanor has caught up with me. She's brought the long bag, and it still has quite a bit of dirt on it. I motion her to follow me as I retreat further back into the woods, picking up the bag as I go. I'm going to need some light, and to do that safely I need to put some distance between me and the Broken Bend residents. Once I'm sure that we're far enough away, I stop and set the bag back down on the ground. I take my cell phone out of my pocket and turn it on so that I can use the flashlight app. As I'm doing so, I notice that I don't have any voicemails or texts. Good. That means that my absence still hasn't been noticed. I unzip the bag and pull it open. Carefully arranged inside are a number of items, but my attention is immediately on the long rifle strapped to the middle. I wince as the Velcro on the straps makes a tearing noise. I listen long enough to make sure that no one heard it before continuing. The weapon is heavy, but I find that weight comforting. It's a Springfield Model 1903, a combination infantry and sniper rifle that I've had and trained with since my days in the Army. Much like me, it's a relic of a bygone era, and most of the parts have been replaced over the years. There are more accurate sniper rifles these days, ones capable of hitting targets from much longer distances while also doing more damage. None of that matters to me. This weapon is an old friend. I know every inch of it, and it's never let me down. I take off my backpack and sling the rifle over my shoulder. Once I've adjusted it into a comfortable position, I open one of the boxes in the bag and take out the magazines inside. I slip them into my pockets. I don't have nearly enough bullets to defend myself against an entire town's worth of people, but my hope is that it doesn't come to that. Feeling much better about my situation, I return to the clearing, Eleanor walking along beside me. The gathered people are still staring at the glowing lake, and as far as I can tell, none of them have moved a muscle. I'm barely settled in behind one of the trees when that changes. As if they are obeying some silent command, all the people in the crowd fall to their knees and turn their faces upward towards the sky. I glance upward, but there doesn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. I turn my attention back to the lake just in time to see something massive begin to rise out of it. I can't tell what it is. As it continues upward, I find that I'm looking at the skeleton of a giant creature. It is face up, and its pointed ribs reach out over the heads of the kneeling crowd. Its long neck is attached to a lizard-like skull, and bone wings stretch out to each side. It takes me a few moments, but I eventually identify it as the remains of a snallygaster. It's an extremely rare creature, a combination of a giant lizard and bird. I haven't heard of a single sighting of one in over 50 years, and never one in this part of the country before. In the center of the ribcage, floating a few inches above the bones of the snallygaster's spine, is a being that I've never seen before. It is thin, almost emaciated, and the gray skin is pulled tightly against its delicate-looking bones. Its two tube-like arms each end in 4 long appendages. Its pair of legs hang down in the air, their 3 toes hovering just above the dead animal's remains. Nearly translucent, leathery wings extend from its back. The head is a perfect sphere. It doesn't have a face or any other features. Instead, there are 2 large holes that open up into the center of the skull. I'm having a hard time looking at the being. No, that's not quite right. It's more that I'm having problems processing what I'm seeing. Whenever I try to closely inspect it, it's like my mind simply slips away from it. More skeletons are rising out of the water. Many of them are human, but there are also various monsters and other creatures present as well. Some of them I recognize. Many of them I don't. I've never seen so many paranormal creatures in one place. A group of 5 people emerge from the woods on the other side of the lake. They are struggling to pull something free of the brush. Raising my rifle, I look down the scope to get a better view. The people are holding thick chains, and the other end of those chains are wrapped around what appears to be a Sasquatch. The ape-like creature looks terrified, and it is struggling for all it's worth. Its efforts aren't enough, though, and its captors manage to drag it out to the edge of the lake and hold it still. The unknown being slowly floats down from its position over the snallygaster until it is standing over the chained animal. The Sasquatch looks up and suddenly stops struggling. Its eyes and mouth open wide as blood begins to run out of its ears. Bending down slightly, the being moves its head closer. As I watch, dozens, if not hundreds, of tentacles extend out from the holes in its skull. Each of them is covered in sharp barbs, and the suckers have razor-like points in the center. They lash out and attach themselves to the side of the Sasquatch's head. The creature cries out for a split second before it goes completely limp. Its handlers step away, and the tentacles lift the animal's body up into the air as they continue to feed. "Praise eternal call," the crowd says as one. An unpleasant thought enters my mind. There are rumors of entities that exist in the cold, dark spaces between universes. Entities more ancient than ancient, so beyond our comprehension that to look at them is to invite in madness. Another small group of people appear, dragging another creature towards the entity. It's taller than I am and at least twice as wide. It walks on two legs while using the knuckles of its long arms to steady itself like a gorilla. It is hairless with brown skin. A long whip-like tail extends from its back. Its neck is oddly long. Even though it's distorted, the face is vaguely human. Oversized pointed teeth hang from its open mouth. The creature looks like someone smashed the worst parts of a werewolf and vampire together. I recognize it immediately as a Vraicolicus, an undead monstrosity that until now I had thought were long gone from the face of the earth. As I watch, the Vraicolicus suddenly lunges to one side, lifting its captors off their feet and breaking free of the chains. It reaches out with one large hand and crushes the nearest person's skull flat like there's no resistance at all. Blood and brain matter leak to the ground. Roaring defiantly, it charges another townsperson and tramples him flat into the dirt. The being known as Kull slowly floats towards the monster. The Vraicolicus turns to face it and bashes its fists against the ground defiantly. Before it can do anything, though, Kull raises one of its thin arms and points towards it. The Vraicolicus's body goes stiff, and although it visibly struggles, it doesn't seem able to move a muscle. Kull reaches in and leans forward, the tentacles once again extending outward from the cavities in the being's skull. Instead of latching on like they had to the Sasquatch, though, the mouth-like suckers open and a thick black fluid begins to flow out of them. It resembles bile, and I feel my stomach churn as it pours down the Vraicolicus's throat. Kull lowers its arms, and the Vraicolicus's paralysis is broken. It makes a choking noise as it collapses, its body going into violent convulsions. Slowly, the seizures lessen until they stop entirely. Haltingly at first, the Vraicolicus gets off the ground and puts itself into the same kneeling position as the human worshippers. "Praise eternal call," the crowd chants again. The monster is completely under Kull's control. That black fluid has to be how it's enthralled the entire town of Broken Bend. For it to have done that on such a large scale without word getting out about it seems impossible, though. I have to be missing something. The answer hits me. The water. That's how it did it. It must have released its bile into the local water supply, and the moment the residents had drunk the water, they'd been infected. Eleanor begins to growl. I don't even have time to look over at her before I hear branches crack as something approaches. It's not a person. I could tell that immediately. It's much too large. I turn towards the noise and find myself staring into the face of a full-grown bear. I hadn't even considered that the local animals would have drunk from the water as well. The bear charges towards me. I barely manage to roll out of the way before it collides with the tree that I was hiding behind. There's a loud crack as its weight smashes into the wood. Before I can turn around, I'm already scrambling towards Eleanor. There's no time for me to get the rifle off my shoulder and take a shot. She's my only chance. My hand closes around her collar, and I release it. Eleanor unleashes an unholy howl as her body rapidly expands. Her black fur thickens and spikes out, and her fangs lengthen and sharpen. When she's finished growing, she's as tall as I am while still standing on all fours. She opens her mouth to reveal burning flames deep in her throat. Steam fills the air around her. Her eyes, resembling two lumps of burning coals, lock onto the bear as she steps between it and me. It's over quickly. There are very few things in the world that could stand up to the fury of a full-blooded hellhound. Before the bear can even take a step forward, Eleanor opens her mouth and spews fire hotter than any natural flame. The entire right half of the animal's body is instantly incinerated, and the burning carcass falls to the forest floor in a heap. A number of trees and plants behind it have been set aflame as well. I unsling my rifle and pull the bolt to load a shot into the chamber. The Broken Bend residents, as well as Call, are looking directly at us. As one, the people raise their right arms and point at us as the fog coming out the lake thickens and rises. Eleanor takes a step forward. "No," I snap at her. "Get back to town." There's a look of surprise in her face as she turns to follow me as I run through the dark woods. I've never expressed doubt in her ability to kill something before. The odds are too stacked against us, though, and we have no idea what else Call itself is capable of. I don't like the idea of heading back towards hostile territory. The residents of the town are obviously going to know it better than I am, and that takes away hiding as an option. It's still a better option than staying in the woods, however. It's too easy to be surrounded here, too easy to be overwhelmed. I risk glancing over my shoulder. I don't see Call, but a number of its infected are in pursuit. We have to be close to town now. At any moment I'm going to see the lights of the street lamps. When that happens, I'm going to have to make some fast decisions. If Eleanor can buy me enough time, I can get one of the cars parked downtown hot-wired and we can drive right out. There's movement to my right. Something large comes lunging out of the darkness. It goes right past me and slams into Eleanor. She lets out a surprised yelp, and both she and her attacker disappear from sight. I instinctively come to a stop so that I can change direction to help her. My pursuers are too close, though, and I almost immediately have to start running again. I just have to hope that Eleanor will be able to deal with whatever it was that went after her. I reach the edge of the woods and continue on towards the town itself. Hiding isn't an option, and I'm not going to leave without Eleanor. That just leaves fighting. I can't do that from here, though. As I approach the police station, I see what I'm looking for. A fire escape in the side of the building leading up to the roof. I look back to check on the progress of the people chasing me. They've fallen further behind. It's doable, but it's going to be close. I reach the side of the building. Instead of climbing up the fire escape, however, I continue down the small space between this building and the one next to it. I duck behind a pair of trash cans and wait, hoping that it's dark enough in the alley to conceal me. The small group of people chasing me catch up a few moments later. They rush down the alley and past where I'm hunched down, not noticing me as they hurry by. After they disappear around the corner, I wait a few seconds before returning to the fire escape and climbing up to the roof. If I had simply gone for the fire escape, they would have seen me going up to the roof. Now, though, it will take a while for them to locate me. That gives me a tactical advantage, and at this point I'm going to need every advantage that I can get. I keep as low as I can as I move to the edge of the roof. Setting the barrel of the rifle down on the short brick ledge, I use the scope to scan the trees in the direction I just came from. More residents are emerging from the woods and heading in this direction. I have a momentary internal debate. I don't want to kill any of these people. What's happening to them isn't their fault. If I don't, though, they're likely going to kill me. Right now is my best chance to increase my odds of survival. I put the nearest one in the scope. My thoughts are interrupted when Eleanor suddenly appears. She flies through the air out of the tree line and onto the road. Landing hard, she shakes her head and gets back to her feet unsteadily. She bares her teeth as she watches the woods. A moment later, another beast emerges from the woods. It's the Vraicolicus. Eleanor doesn't wait for the creature to reach her. Instead, she charges forward and sinks her teeth into its shoulder. It barely seems to notice the wound as it reaches over, pulls her loose, and smashes her onto the ground. Even from this distance, I can hear her yelp of pain. I grit my teeth and carefully take aim with the rifle. I don't know much about Vraicolicus, but it's obvious that it's going to be hard to bring it down and keep it down. Eleanor is trying to fight back, but the Vraicolicus isn't giving her time to. Every time that she attempts to attack, it uses its bulk to interrupt her and cause more damage. A few bullets isn't going to kill this thing. They might be able to buy her some time to recover. I aim carefully, release the breath I'm holding, and fire. The moment that the shot is away, I'm already sliding the bolt to load another. Military training never really goes away, not completely. The Vraicolicus' head snaps back as the round strikes it directly in the eye. I'm a very good shot, but placing one in such a small target from this distance is just as much luck as it is skill. The creature clutches at its face and staggers back a single step. That's enough for Eleanor. She throws her body forward, knocking the Vraicolicus completely off its feet. Opening her jaws wide, she bathes the creature in a wave of flame. I hear a scraping noise from behind me. Instantly dropping the rifle, I pull my handgun from its holster and spin around. One of the townspeople has climbed up onto the roof and is charging towards me. I fire the weapon, and he collapses as he's struck in the chest. I rush over to him and put a second bullet into his head to be sure he stays down. Returning to the rifle, I'm shocked to find that the Vricholacus has somehow made it back to its feet. Large sections of its skin are burned and melted away, the charred bone underneath exposed. It barely seems to notice. Eleanor opens her mouth again, but before she can breathe fire, the creature clamps its hand down on her jaws and closes them. The other hand comes up and slams into the side of her head. It continues to hit her again and again. I can't line up a shot to help her. Her body is in the way. More noise behind me. I turn my head and see that two more of the infected residents are climbing up onto the roof. For the first time, I'm starting to feel real panic rising in me. Even if I take care of these people, they're just going to keep coming. I definitely won't be any help to Eleanor if I'm torn apart. Grabbing the rifle with my free hand, I shoot both the infected before hurrying back over to the fire escape. I look down at the street and swear violently. There are easily a dozen infected down there, and there are more on the fire escape itself. I'm trapped on the roof. I point the gun down at the approaching people. It's bad odds, but I might be able to fight my way to street level. From there, I'll need to lose the other infected and find a new vantage point to try and help Eleanor. A large group of people come around the corner and enter the alley. So much for that idea. There's far too many of them now. I try to work out a plan. There has to be some sort of way out of this. There's always a way out. I run over to the other side of the roof, hoping to find another way down or another roof close enough to jump to. The fire escape is the only way down. I raise the rifle and briefly return my attention to Eleanor. She's lying on her side in the road, panting heavily and not getting back up. I can only hope that she's just had the wind knocked out of her, or that she's momentarily stunned. I have a clear shot at the Vricholacus now. Pausing for just a moment to account for the wind, I pull the trigger and fire. The bullet strikes the creature in the side of the neck, and it roars in frustration. I haven't heard it, but I do think I'm starting to piss it off. The infected have reached the roof. One by one, they climb over the top of the fire escape and start towards me. Most of them are unarmed, but some are carrying makeshift weapons like rocks or boards. I drop the rifle and raise my gun. There are way too many of them. Far, far too many of them. Steadying my jaw, I raise the barrel of the handgun up and place it against my temple. I can't let them take me. I won't let myself become a part of Cole's little cult. I might not have been able to find a way to kill the monster that has tormented me for more than one lifetime, but I'll be damned if I let another one use me. I'm feeling strangely at peace with what I have to do, but my hand starts to shake. It must be the adrenaline. I struggle to hold it still. I furrow my brow. No, it's not adrenaline. My hand is shaking because it's cold. The temperature has suddenly dropped noticeably. Not just by a few degrees either. I can see my breath in the air. The infected stop advancing. As one, they turn their heads to look back towards the woods. There's silence. The only sound is the frigid wind blowing through the streets below. Not sure what's happening. I keep the gun barrel firmly against my head. The silence is broken by a roar. It isn't Eleanor. This sound is more hollow, and it's filled with an eagerness and bloodlust that chills me far more than the cold. All of the infected turn away from me and begin to climb back down the fire escape. I have no idea what's going on. When the last one disappears over the edge of the roof, I slowly lower the gun. Down at the street level, the crowd is moving towards the woods. Shaking myself out of my stupor, I retrieve my rifle and use the scope to get a better look. The Vricholacus has seemingly forgotten about Eleanor and is looking the same direction the people are heading. There's another of the terrible cries. I place two of my fingers to my mouth and whistle as loudly as I can. It's risky, and it might draw the attention of the infected again, but I don't care. Whatever is happening, Eleanor needs to get out of that general area now. She must have heard me. Slowly, she pushes herself off the ground and takes a step towards me. She looks like she's going to collapse for a brief moment, but she manages to keep herself upright and continues forward. I practically run to the fire escape and hurry down to the ground. I emerge from the alley just as Eleanor reaches the building. A lump forms in my throat. Her black fur is covered in blood, and she's favoring her front left leg. She comes up to me and puts her nose up against my hand before shrinking back down to her dog form. "You were incredible," I assure her, gently stroking the fur between her ears. "Just rest for a while. Get your strength back." She whimpers and leans up against me. More people are coming out of some of the nearby buildings. They all ignore us as they hurry towards the woods. A third roar pierces the night. Before it can even begin to fade, a dark shape comes flying out from inside the trees. It lands in the street nearby and skids half a dozen yards before coming to a stop, leaving a dark smear on the concrete. The shape is so mangled that it's difficult to tell for sure, but it looks like the front half of a mountain lion. There's a loud snapping noise, and a large something steps out of the trees. It's around 10 feet tall, and its limbs are long and thin. While its body is vaguely humanoid, its face is more like a dog or wolf's muzzle. What appears to be bone covers much of the face, and fang-like teeth fill its open mouth. There's only one creature in the world that looks like this. I'm staring at a Wendigo.